Hello, I'm going to talk about the Texas Industrial Remcor solenoid valve 1999. This valve is different than the 2500 both in looks and the way it functions. Now the way it functions technically is along the lines of a pilot operated valve. We'll get into that definition more later when we get into the troubleshooting aspect. Now on the troubleshooting aspect, obviously we're going to cover the valve won't open, the valve appears to partially open, and the valve won't close. So the quickest way to check, and we're going to start with the valve not opening, the quickest thing to check with a valve not opening is to find out if the solenoid is good or bad. Now the fastest way to check that is disconnect the leads, get a multimeter, set it to the ohms function, which is the upside down horseshoe or the omega symbol, however you know that. We're going to set it so that we get continuity, and remember that continuity test is running through the meter itself, so that's the reason we do not want anything attached to this. Again, the valve formula or the electrical formula is volts equals your resistance, which is going to show on the meter, times the rated amperage, which is 1.1. So we've got 1.1 and we take a reading on this valve and we get 11.2. We're going to get a value somewhere right around 12 if we multiply those two together. Now 11.2 is well within the resistance, which this OEM should be 11 plus or minus 0.5. As the resistance goes down on the meter, remember your amp load is going up. So that may be causing fuses to blow or things like that. But at this point in time, we've cleared the solenoid. Valve still won't open, so what do we look at next? The leading cause of the solenoid not opening on a 1999, which I have this, the screws all loosened up for speed, but the leading cause for that would be the plunger, which you would remove these two nuts and bolts. You simply twist and remove the solenoid from the valve itself. We lift that off, we get the solenoid. There's an O-ring here that needs to be in place, and then there's going to be a spring and a plunger. The cause is most likely this plunger has swollen up a little bit. There's a 30 thousandths clearance that this operates in, which is the same as the gap on a standard spark plug. So this is not lifting off of the valve seat fully, so that's why the valve is not opening or fully opening. So again, it's going to be something to do with this valve seat. Now, moving on to the valve is not fully closing. That could be due to either coining, which you'll see the impression of this little valve seat on the rubber, or it could be some trash that's down inside of that that's holding this partially open and allowing the fluid to bypass on this. So that's a check you can do on this side of the valve as well. Now, there's no coining on this, there's no trash in here. The valve is running on, dribbling on, however you want to describe it. At this point, we're going to remove these 4 screws on this plastic cap of the valve body, and then we're going to carefully lift this off. And before we get into the problem diagnosis, I want to explain how to put this back together and another inspection point. There's a plastic stud here that, as you saw, it leads down into a plastic hole here. Within that hole is a rubber O-ring. We want to take that O-ring and look at it for a cut or a tear, particularly if you have leakage around the outside edge when this is assembled coming out through here. Typical application would be that we would put the O-ring back on the stud side of the plastic. In this, the experience since 1980 has shown that we cut too many O-rings by installing it that way. So you push this down in the hole. You can use the back side of a screw head to flatten it out and just push it down in there nice and snug. Now what you can do for reassembly ease is put a little bit of either olive oil or petroleum jelly on the end of this so that it'll slide down through that O-ring easier. Now the function of this valve, going back to the pilot operated so that we get a better idea, is that there's a hole that's cross drilled, and it starts in here, and you can see from my little awl, it goes in that side, and then it comes out on this side. So what happens, and the way this valve works, is this diaphragm shuts off on the valve body. This plunger shuts off on the top side. So we've got an air pocket that is formed up in here, which keeps the valve closed. When this plunger lifts, that air pocket is broken. The fluid on the bottom side exerts pressure, pushes the diaphragm fully open, and it continues to run. When the plunger closes down, it reestablishes the air pocket, forcing the diaphragm down, and it seals off here, and that air pocket then stops the valve from running. If this valve, or if this diaphragm has a cut or a tear in it, what happens is the fluid can now flow directly through as though this plunger is open, and that's going to allow your valve to basically flow freely open or partially open. So that's where the most common cause for that is. Now TIR sells a repair kit that's going to have the diaphragm and the plunger, the spring I believe, and a couple of O-rings in it, and that is a KT2517. When you replace one, replace the other, because both have the same number of cycles, at least starting from the factory. So then we're going to reassemble this valve, assuming that we've put a repair kit in it. We put the diaphragm in, which there's a rubber O-ring side to it, and the large rubber seal area goes down on top of that. There's just a steel washer on the other. The O-ring will actually slide into a groove around the outside there. Then we're going to start the pin, which just guides the diaphragm and keeps it more on a center line. And then we're going to try and push this down so that it snaps in place like this, and it also slides around the OD here. So it's important to try and push it down as parallel as you can. At that point, we would reestablish or re-screw in and tighten these 4 screws. Remember, you're doing plastic, so we don't want to strip them out. We want to make sure that the plunger goes rubber side down, spring side up, that this O-ring is fully attached on this side, and then we would simply slide it back down on the inside like this. Put your 2 bolts and 2 nuts back together, tighten accordingly, and then we should have a solenoid valve that's ready to go. Thank you.
Texas Industrial Remcor, quality valves and controls today and tomorrow.